This is Dan McInerney from Protect AI. Today we're looking at the security of a tool called H2O, a popular open source tool suite for a low-code way of creating machine learning models that abstracts a lot of the details away for you. To get started, let's follow their simple tutorial. You can start H2O in 3 easy steps. We download it, then we run the jar, and then we point our browser to this URL. So we've already downloaded it. We're just going to run the jar file. H2O Flow will open up on port 54321, and H2O Flow is like the web UI of this tool. Here is what it looks like. Now, unfortunately, I have made a terrible mistake, and the reason is because by default, that tutorial guides you to open up that jar file, and that jar file opens up H2O Flow not just on your local host, but on all interfaces, meaning anybody on your network can just hit your IP address, 192.168.1.7, and port 54321 and see this same page. This becomes an issue when you start using the tool itself. So let's look at the first API call that it suggests, import files. Probably a good starting place. A lot of people are going to start here. It auto-populates all the files on the H2O server, meaning anybody on your local network can hit this interface and then map out your entire file structure. So we're going to call that vulnerability number 1, and then we'll just continue on. Hey, look, there is my private SSH key, as accessible to everybody on the network. Search it, click it, import it. All right, let's parse it out, and there it is. That's my private SSH key, which can be remotely accessible to anyone on the network. Moving on to vulnerability number 3, H2O gives the user the ability to export the data frame that you just imported. So we're going to hit parse, we're going to hit view, and then export right here. You'll notice this handy little overwrite checkbox, which does exactly what you think it does. It lets you overwrite any file on the file system. Now this is somewhat mitigated because it writes a CSV file. It doesn't just write raw text. In this case, we overwrote temp/overwrite, and we can see what it looks like. There's the whole private key. Here's the column names. So you can't just overwrite the shadow file, for instance, and change the root password. But you can just overwrite the shadow file entirely in denial of service the users of the system. So the question is, why does H2O allow this? For one, there's 2 ways to initialize H2O. The jar file, which the tutorial recommends as the first usage, or programmatically, like importing the library in Python and running h2o.init. When run programmatically, it defaults to only running on localhost, not all interfaces, which mitigates these vulnerabilities since they're not remotely exploitable anymore. And by doing so, H2O just has the same file system permissions that you already have as a local user. H2O does allow you to shoot yourself in the foot still by letting you run it on your server's network interface, but at least this isn't the default as it is when you run it from the jar file. From a practical standpoint, the way this will be exploited is an attacker sends a phishing email, gains access to the credentials that allow them on the internal network, or a rogue employee already has access to the internal network, and they scan the network for web servers using Nmap. They find H2O Flow or the H2O port, explore the file system through H2O's import file, then download the SSH keys or cloud keys, and use those to go further their access in the network. Or they just take the data and models stored on the server. As of this recording, these vulnerabilities have not yet been patched, so if you absolutely must use H2O, we recommend only starting the server from within the programmatic interface, meaning importing the Python or R library and running h2o.init, and not overriding the default settings that lock it into the localhost interface. This will prevent you from exposing your entire file system to all the computers on your network. Interestingly, as far as we can tell, there is no way of running H2O from the downloadable jar file that the tutorial tells you to run that doesn't expose your file system to the entire network. Even setting the command line argument IP to 127.0.0.1 or localhost still exposes the H2O interface to your external public IP address, and hence all computers on your network. So do not run H2O from the jar file.
Ready to spotlight your skills? Join the hunt on hunter.com.